policies are analyzed. Um, as I said, and I mentioned again, it's not a methodology course, so we just go over it so that you have an idea. You will get more of this in the economics bachelor's further away, and if you continue your master's, then you get even more. Okay, so why is it important to analyze development process? Why do you? Why is it important to analyze policies in general, development policies?
I guess maybe for the future, just to improve some of the values in the past.
Okay, so to improve whatever we do for having better policies.
Sorry.
What else do you think? Why is it important to measure, to evaluate policies?
So probably if you get data and analyze it, you can make some statements. So to compare to other countries and to get growth running, you need data.
Yes. Okay. So data is important for evaluation. Yes. Anyone has any other idea? Why is it important to analyze policies?
To talk about the different impacts of policies?
Yes, so the impacts maybe beyond whatever the policy was intended to do. So, yeah, you touched some of the points. There is this idea of the 3 I's. It was made by some of the Nobel Prizes in development economics came up with this. After analyzing a lot of how policies are done in the developing world, what happens? Usually you have politicians that mainly they just go with some maybe belief that they had before, so some ideology that they have, maybe because their former presidents or their dynasties already had this policy in place, so they don't have to change anything, so inertia also could be a reason why people continue with policies who may or may not work. And sometimes just blatant ignorance, like as you guys mentioned, if we don't measure what we're doing, how can we even know what is happening? How can we know? So what happens, and usually you see this in Latin America, is that the politicians, they go and they do a program, and then they go and check, what is happening, and they see some people, and they ask them, hey, how do you feel about this program? And the people are like, yes, very happy, thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, why do you think this is not, or why this is not a, let's say, good way to know if a policy is doing well?
Maybe it's more driven like re-elected, maybe some just cash in and like some small transactions, and it's not like more objective.
It's not objective, yes. And why is it subjective? Why, if I am, let's say I'm a politician, yes, I want to be both an extern, and I want to see if the policies I made are having an impact, and I just go, let's say I build some houses for some poor people, and I just go to some houses and I ask them, hey, how do you feel? And they're like, yeah, yes.
Because they have such a short-term, very local effect, and so on a bigger scale, it's almost irrelevant.
Yes, exactly. So it could be this scale, no? Is it, I think you mentioned this before, is these groups that I'm going to representative of the whole population that I impacted. No? So this is what we call in economics jargon selection. So which people do I ask the question? This is already very important. If I impacted some group of people with a program, with a policy to increase their development, I have to be very careful who I ask about this impact and how I ask this. In terms of the time frame also, as you mentioned, maybe if I made a house today, let's say, and let's not think of a house, I think a house is a very short-term good effect. Let's think about, maybe I want to increase the quality of education, and I started with building a school. No, if I go tomorrow, okay, the school was built, then I go to check. Let me see if the quality of education increased. Of course, I won't find any effect because the school was just built yesterday. We need to wait until the effects are started. So. Yeah, also another reason why, especially in Latin America, in our region, we need to be careful and really analyze development policies and know their impact, specifically in terms of the time frame, in terms of whom is impact, in terms of whether it's good or not, is because we have little policy space. And the policy space is just another fancy word for money, no? So we don't have that much money to do all of these different policies that, for example, in developed countries you can do. And we learned why in the first few weeks that we have these external and internal factors in Latin America that prevent us from having this economic growth. But then also we need this money to make these policies, because usually these policies come from the, let's say, the initiative of the government. If you want to build schools, you need some resources to do that. If you want to implement any policy, it always needs some resources, even if you only need to pay people, but this is also wages that you need to pay. So this is also one important reason why we need to evaluate. So we need to make sure that we are spending the money in the best way possible, in the policies that really impact people, that really benefit them. If we are doing, let's say, if we are very creative and are, for example, this famous policy of 1 laptop per child, a lot of countries in Latin America, they gave away many laptops, and in our minds, yeah, this is amazing, now everybody has a laptop. First of all, then we have to see if they work. A lot of them didn't really work that long. But also, okay, we have to also take into account many different factors. Are students really learning with these laptops, or are they just getting distracted? Are teachers trained enough to use these laptops, or they don't have the tools? So that's why it's very important to be especially picky when we do development policies. And as we learn in Latin America, we don't have any time to lose. We are very far back in our development, and we should rather make effort to catch up or to increase the benefits that we give their people. And also, I think you was mentioned already, whenever you you design a policy, maybe you have something in mind, the goal of the policy, you hopefully, and this is not always the case, but hopefully you have a policy design, some document where you specify the goal of this policy, how long it will be there, what is it that you intend to do. But even when you have this in a perfect, smart, and organized way, maybe there are some externalities. Do you know what externalities are? Somebody explain briefly. Okay, go ahead.
If we talk about an economic model and we describe how some parts of the economy works, and there comes in the ecological crisis, like climate crisis, and this is not mentioned in the model, so we say, okay, it's just externalities, but it's really important to include it in real life problems, so that's one example of externalities.
Yeah, that's a very typical example of, for example, if you have a company that they do a lot of good in the world, they produce energy, let's say, people can have their electricity and their gadgets that they can use, but the externality of this, so the spillover is also another word, is that this company is polluting the rivers around the community. Like mining companies, for example, that leave very dry rivers. Education is another one that has a lot of externalities, and maybe this is something we can discuss later. But just quickly for you to know also, how can we establish the impact of a policy? This is something that is not very easy to do. As we mentioned, I think last time, 2 weeks ago, you can see a lot of data that comes together, but not necessarily means that this is a causal effect. So how do we establish my policy did Y? No, with my policy I increased the level of math scores by 10%. And I can be sure of this because I somehow studied. So the main important thing to consider is the counterfactual. And have you ever heard this word, counterfactual? So it's just, if you take the word apart, factual is something that is, it is, no? It's what it is. And counter is something that is not. No? So maybe it's not confusing that way, but what it means is what would have happened if this program or this policy was not in place. So in this graph, you can see that the policy that I created, no? Let's say I wanted to increase the education quality in my country, and I created this nice program in time Y, time T, and I see, oh yeah, starting from this time, I can clearly see that the math scores or the language scores increased. What would be the problem here? Yes?
You can't be sure that it's your program that did this change, not an external factor. Like for the math case, maybe at the same time a TV show got really popular when it solved math problems, so maybe your policy didn't affect.
Yeah, maybe at Khan Academy, somebody in this time started, the students were really interested in math. Yeah. What else? Maybe think about the trend, no, in time. Does it look exactly like there was a big change? Sam?
I think between the problems starting point and the next point, there's like a bigger increase, but then the growth rate is like mostly the same like before. So I think it's one big impact, and then it's like steadily increasing, but not that much. That at the point when it was.
When the program started. Yes, exactly. So if you think about, maybe this is just the outcomes, the average of the outcomes per time, but if we think about the change between this and this, this and this, this and this, maybe yes, there is a big slope there, but maybe when we calculate the means, it's not that different. So maybe it was something that was already increasing, no, the math score, and I just say that it was because of my policy, but it was not. And for this, well, in the experimental type of policies, when you have like a treatment and a random control groups, you can just find the average of the effect, because then you assume, okay, there is a counterfactual group, so there is a group that, in other words, will have been the same in time, and we can compare these apples and apples. This is like constructed by me, but I'm saying, okay, this group looks like this group, and if I give the policy to this group, if I randomize and I see that these two groups are very similar to each other, I can then claim that these people have better grades because of my program. So the counterfactual is a bit like, I don't know if you saw the flash, but it's like also creating a parallel person that is similar to you in another universe. So at the same time, this one person, your clone, is like getting one program and the other clone is not. And this will be the perfect scenario where you see, okay, then I know exactly what my impact is. But this is impossible. We cannot observe the same person at the same time. So so the counterfactual will be at the program. So if the program wasn't there, then the trend would have been the blue line. Okay. But what we observed, in fact, is that the program, after it started, then the math score, the language score increased. So if I had this counterfactual, this is impossible, you cannot know it. But if I had it, I could definitely calculate the impact. So what would have happened if the program was not there versus what happened? This is the impact of the program. So theoretically, it's a bit hard to grasp, but is what will be ideal. But we cannot go back in time and change things and then find out. So then what we do is that we do these randomized experiments, and we have these quasi-experimental that we mentioned as time, difference and difference, regression design, instrumental variables. Many things that you can do to try to get into these counterfactual-like groups. So usually you have a population of eligible units to which you aim your policy. So my policy is for indigenous people, no? This is the population that I want to study. Then remember, you have to select who you want to evaluate, no? And this is important because if you select only the men from the indigenous groups, then you're missing half of the population, which is the women. Or if you select children, but then you want to understand the whole population, and you are already not being representative. So your external validity, this is the term for this idea, then is not right. So you're not representative of the population that you want to evaluate. Then a second step is within your evaluation sample. Then, you have a treatment group, a control group, and are they really balanced? So if I split the room, say I shuffle you, and I then randomly select half of you, then I hope that at the end I find similar characteristics in terms of gender, age, whatever. And then I can compare you, because I'm comparing apples to apples in the group term. But if you don't have that, then your internal validity then is the one that is suffering. So internal validity mainly means, okay, you are comparing two groups that are very similar to each other, so that you can claim, okay, this control group is like the counterfactual. It's like what would have happened if the policy was not there. So it's not for you to, you're not gonna get a test on this, so it's just for you to get a first taste. And there is this nice book by Gelter et al. They have impact policy, impact evaluation in practice. And if you're more interested into getting to know this, you can, but for this course we don't have to go deep into this. Any questions on this so far? Okay, if not, then let's use some minutes to talk about the term paper. So you already please start thinking about the topic just in a very general way. So we have an internal deadline. It's not a set up in stone deadline, so don't be worried. But just to get you started about thinking about your idea, so your topic in general. If you like one of the topics that we have given so far, or you still want to wait for one of the topics that will be coming, but maybe you want to already take a look at the readings and think about your idea. So in 2 weeks, I think, in the 12th is the deadline to upload your paper topic. It's just in Blackboard, and there will be a discussion forum where you can include your topic. And then we will use this tool for you to upload your outlines and your ideas. So it's just for you to start thinking about it. Okay, so now onto the topic of today. We will talk about education and health. So you probably all heard about human capital theory already, no? From the readings in the beginning. Can somebody refresh what it was? Human capital, what it is?
It's like we talk about capital as it is, and then human capital, and human capital is related to like what can a human do like invest in himself or herself to get a better output if we talk about economics? So mostly you can invest in education or health, and it's a problem to measure a bit. So it's not that normal capital, I call it. That's likely or more easy to measure, and human capital is more related like to personalities.
Yeah. Yeah, you're already even more advanced. Personalities usually not be good at, but it should be. But yes, so you're on the right track. So human capital is basically what can make a human productive. No? So if we are thinking about economic growth, then we need humans and we need the labor. And for these people to be able to work productively, they need some kind of education, they need to be healthy. Yeah, and probably there are many other things like personality, depending on the occupation, for example, this is important. So if I say, if I define development, and here we are reducing development into one measure, but bear with me. So let's say I call development growth. So maybe let's just put it as the whole thing. So let's say GDP per capita, and change is just a, usually you use this data for change. No? So how much does the GDP per capita grows per year? Maybe this is an average for some years. And how, actually no, let's do it this way. Let's think about the individual first. So we have here human capital, no? So what is it that you mentioned? So education. What else? Plus?
Health.
Health. What else? Any other? What makes you productive? Think about your own job life.
Technology.
Yes, I mean, well, yeah. Maybe now more with AI, it can help you to be more productive. Okay, let's do that. But you need education to know how to use the technology, so maybe it's included there. Yeah. Any other?
Family background.
Family background. Okay. Mhm. What else?
Infrastructure.
Okay, so
Maybe skills, but I think that's maybe education also.
what
Skills, maybe.
skills? Yeah. Is often also called skills
Okay.
education. Yeah.
Maybe where they were born as well.
So family background, where they were born, yeah. So origin, maybe language, migration, blah blah, blah. Race, ethnicity, yeah. You mentioned something important in infrastructure, no? Somewhere, yeah.
What about like your own innate ability? Like maybe some people born genius or really better than other
Yes,
people.
and this is very important. Where will you put this?
Family background.
As a family background, okay, could be here. Ability, let's call it A. Where else could we go? Yeah?
Like skills, personal skills.
Yeah.
You develop maybe over time. So
Yeah, but why is it that it could be here or here?
because it could be related to your family, what they,
Yeah.
how they educate you at home. in your first
No, no,
years.
she mentioned innate ability, so it's maybe more about
Genes.
genes, yeah.
Okay.
So maybe it's genetics. But also this is a latent variable, so it's something that you cannot measure, but maybe it's something that really manifests itself with the skills. So maybe when you are educating yourself, showing your skills, your ability can really be shown here. Also, it's kind of depends on the family background, but you are kind of measuring it already here. So this is also something I'll evaluate in the literature. Okay, but not to make it longer. What do you think all of these factors influence? Let's think about one person. No, how does her education help the technology she has or he has, his family background? And this is more like external factors where we can even talk more about this, but let's say the external factors are already one, then what would it influence in the future?
That person's ability to produce economical growth.
Yeah, the productivity. And how do we usually measure productivity?
I just a question about your infrastructure. You said it's external, but it also depends on where you've been born. So the person that is maybe born in highly developed city is maybe more able to decide much greater possibilities for future of life than a person on like rural areas.
Yeah, with less.
So-
Yeah, exactly. So maybe actually, and this is where we talk about endogeneity. So endogeneity, always think about when the person can decide for themselves. So a person can decide how much education they get. Maybe they could also decide on their health to some extent. Maybe they can also decide for tech. Family background, you're kind of born when you're born, you cannot decide. Maybe you can decide later on who you marry and whatever. But yeah, so maybe even this is also an external factor. And they are correlated. So usually what you see, these Mincer equations, is these two. And then everything else is just assumed to be an error term, because this is an endogenous model. So I can decide my skills, my health, and then this will show some productivity. But how do you measure productivity nowadays? Do you remember me from the first readings?
Maybe output, like how
Yeah,
if we have one more worker, how much more can we produce?
yeah, output per person. And how do we calculate this in a more efficient way? Because it's hard to count, for example, if I make, I don't know, yeah, I make papers, then how can they calculate my productivity? How many papers I publish, maybe? But then to compare this.
With money.
Yeah, exactly. So wage, no? That's why in a competitive system, you use wages as like productivity. So wages usually proxy for productivity. Yeah, and this is the Mincer equation. So the wages of the person depends on the education, the health, some other variables that we will know.
So if we measure productivity, like human capital comes down to wages. So a guy who is a engineer who makes 80,000 a year is less productive than a billionaire who just invests in stocks.
Yes, so this is
Okay.
where it's assuming a model of free market competitiveness, and this is where you get the wages as the most productive. But this also raises a lot of questions on what is really productivity. Nowadays, a person with just a button can make millions, while a person that is putting effort, physical effort or mental effort, doesn't get that much money. So this is also a criticism to this. But this is a model that usually we use to calculate this. Yeah.
And it's on the other side, you can also break it down to just how many input you got, and at the end how many output you can produce. So it's not only about wages,
Okay.
so also about how high is the output referred to the input you had first when you started. Maybe like just in normal production factory or something. Yeah, pretty basic, I guess.
But then this heterogeneity also is not there in terms of occupation and different efforts. Yeah, so this is the basic idea of the human capital theory. And then if we go a step further, and what happens if we aggregate? So this is like each person, no? Person I, productivity of person I, the family background person I, and then I goes from 1 to how many people are in the country. No, it's here in Germany 80 million, so it can be the productivity of person 1, the health of person 1, etc. Then in the aggregate, what do we observe? So how can you then extrapolate this to a general growth model? What will be the wage now? And I was already writing.
The GDP.
Yeah, so GDP per capita. And then it not only wages, so we also have like the profits of the companies, the borrowing, the finances, and then this all goes into GDP, and then we divide it per capita, and we have our aggregate measure of the country's productivity. No? If I say also, if I put this symbol here, then it just means growth. So what is the change between years? And here then, how would you calculate? How would you aggregate the education?
Like you have a constant, like say one variable, and then you put your years in education in, and you like do person 1 has 3 years, the next 12 years, and then you aggregate, so you sum it up.
Do you sum all of them up? All of the years of education?
No, like you have one constant which describes the change, like 1 year of education will increase output by 0. So and so, and then if you put more years in, this will grow, like typical regression.
Okay, but you're already thinking about the effect, no? I'm just asking how you aggregate the education measure. You mentioned it already. So you
Summing
have,
up all people, you
okay, I mean, yes, but a bit further, maybe usually the typical measure is that you take an average of the years of education. So in the country, if we're talking about a country here, since this country blah, I want to know the general level of education in the population. Maybe aggregating is something you can do. I don't know. Maybe it could be interesting to have this measure, but you can have the average of years of schooling, for example. Years of schooling. What about health? What could you do?
I think the average life expectancy.
Yeah, average life expectancy is very used. What others?
death rate, or like
Yeah, death rate, but then what will be the issue with death rate? What do you need to do? People die every year, no?
Yes.
By age, by any reason. So then maybe you need to put
So-
some interesting aspect of why is the death there.
okay,
Yeah, so maybe excess death or death by
one
accidents
crisis, yes.
or crisis. Yeah.
Maybe the infant mortality rate.
Yeah, infant mortality. It's used a lot. And already you can see we can put 10,000 million variables there. And this is also an issue because then you proxy for health with one of these variables. Usually you cannot build a model with 10 million variables, it's impossible, unless you have 30,000 million observations. But yeah, already here there's a human choice that you have to make to assume, yeah, this tells me something about the health of that nation and years of schooling also there's a bit of an issue there, but I'll leave that for the presentation later. And here also we put more of these variables which are no longer external but are actually endogenous of the country, because the country is actively deciding, the politicians, the people, what would be the infrastructure, maybe the family background. It's something that also comes from history, but it's also that maybe with policies you can change, etc. So you get the idea, more or less, why these are growth models. And the theory of human capital is then that you have these two main variables, education, health, and then you get the productivity of the country.
What about
What about?
technology? What does it
Technology,
also
yes,
mean?
yeah,
How
also
is it
here.
found?
Yeah, also here. So there are different models. Most of them use technology in it. There is a debate whether technology is endogenous of the country, if the country itself can develop its technology, given that it has, for example, low education or whatever, or if it is something that comes from abroad and people adopt it. So there is a debate there, but for sure technology comes in the growth. Okay, what can we do now in this last minute? So let's discuss this briefly. We don't have that much time, and we don't have that many people. Okay, so let's just take 5 minutes. These are questions that we have already been discussing a little bit, and then we can just say a few words before we start with the presentation. Can you see the wording? More or less. Okay, so the first one is, can education fulfill the promise of development? Do you know what this question means? What is the promise of development?
The growth,
Sorry?
the growth happening.
Yeah, that growth will happen because of education, you said?
Yeah, well, high income after
And you will have
graduation.
high income,
Yeah.
education, yeah, what else?
Have a good job and
Better life quality.
yeah.
Sorry?
But I don't understand. I don't know why it's like promise from university or
From
promise.
university or
Yeah.
what do you
It depending on promise from university or promise from educational institution.
no,
or,
education in general. So like the promise is, if this is like the text of today that said, okay, education can really increase, break the barriers of getting a job, increasing your income,
Life quality.
increase your life quality, it will lower health issues, it will help you live longer even. There are studies that show you probably take care more of your children if you have, etc. So maybe we can all discuss it together. What are the main issues with these? Okay, the thing I don't want is the same people. That's why maybe we should split into groups. Okay, how can we do that? We don't have that much time. Yeah, let's just do this. So 5 minutes discussing, 5 minutes, then we close up together, okay? So please get into groups. So 3, 3, 2, and 2. And you do questions 1, 2, 3. 5 minutes only, so just
So we do questions.
4. If you want to read.
So I think it's
So yeah, just 5 minutes now, and then say one sentence about this, okay? So choose your sentence well. If you want to use they are here, but you just have to say one sentence.
I think that depending on like educational outcome. Like for example, if you have high grades and better than others, and then why the employee doesn't employ you instead of others, and if you have a good performance at university or educational institute, and then why the education allowed you to fulfill the promise, and if yeah, like it depends on the individual, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
How about
You don't improve your skills.
not the educational system, but the individual,
Yeah.
personal skills.
And especially for middle Wait, what?
I would say education can
It is a lesson.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Then give more.
Like even if you don't learn anything, they don't do anything hard. Like they keep doing crime.
Even if you don't go to university, like at least some level of education helps you to like sort ways.
No, we have to find out what is important.
So we want to do it.
No, no, I do both.
Yes.
It does.
The question is
It is.
how fast
And have some idea of being productive.
So why do it?
maybe the
It takes a lot of time.
system is that you don't.
Yeah.
I mean,
I feel like it is not
What's the
because
productivity? So if
Well,
there's
yeah.
any chance,
Um,
give opportunity because like
Big opportunity.
if the individual does not try one's best in education system, then the education won't be useful. But then, like, if he tries his best and the outcome is good, then it becomes like more likely to get a job at the reward. I mean, not
Aber das auch zum Glück, wenn wir keine Ahnung in Kosten, in der Schulzeit ist es schwer.
no, like how this measures.
or like, should I say it first and then you and
If you have like then like
I think you can say that.
a chain, if you have like managers who are learning and who are learning pure poor education, and then you can't understand health information and like getting good jobs.
Parents work.
Yeah,
Jobs you can't.
Oder halt
For example, someone is already developed well
Because
for
mostly they have to
entering
pay
to
for
the
the
educational
healthcare
system,
themselves.
and then it
And the
means
rates
that
are
the
really high, I
educational
think,
system does not
like
bring
30%,
effect to
36 around.
them, right?
And oftentimes
So if you don't have those jobs, because
Already
of
very
education can't afford
It means that
and,
basically for
yeah,
your
it's
parents,
just
teachers
vicious
don't have their
vicious
vicious
cycle.
like percentage you get
So
from
the
parents.
distribution of wealth
What?
is eigentlich
Yeah, single parents, so you can lose everything, so you still need an educational system to continue with this.
So you mean that development doesn't have a compound? You mean that development doesn't have a compound? So there is infinity development.
I think nobody is thinking, what did you eat for breakfast?
And then this leads to inequality.
A spoon of
Yeah.
Okay, but
a spoon of what is this? What is flower, like sunflowers, and there are seeds.
Yes,
Sunflower
I think
seeds.
vicious
A spoon of sunflower.
But I think that we need also like
yeah, so
yeah.
maybe because we don't have time and you can focus on the show. So we do start like the reading presentation.
Our
There is no.
In Latin America. this is something that also was
No, I
there
think I say first, and if you want to add something.
Okay, so
But I will.
just in just one sentence, or maybe two. What do you guys find? What is your argument? Final argument?
We thought it was no, because like although education can increase the chance and opportunity of promise of development, but it's actually not the education system itself, but the individuals who are in the education system that has to try one's best to actually make the chances of one's development. Like also, so if one tries one's best, then and get a good educational outcome, then it can lead to a better job, better opportunity to earn more money, and lead to development at last. So we thought it should be more dependent on the individuals who get the education system.
Okay, okay. I like your argument. However, education, yeah, is already something you can maybe choose. But also could be that your parents choose for you, know, your education, and maybe this already depends on some other variables. For example, if your parents, they did not get education, it's very likely that you won't get or will get low education. So what is missing there? Whoever wants to join in.
I saw a graphic the last lecture I had in economic history, and there was this one graph where he showed that inequality is a big issue in terms of education, because the people who study at universities, I think like 70 or 80% of them come from families that have academic backgrounds. So I think inequality is the bigger issue here, maybe. But also I think education can fulfill the promise of development, but also not. You know, you have countries like Finland that have an exceptional education system, which doesn't work in every country, you know, in any other culture system, and it really depends. And I think it's a small part of a bigger picture. And I think you need so many variables to have productive or good development. Education is one of them, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, and maybe it's because we talked about growth as development, and maybe we already forgot development is more than growth, no? Than economic growth. So as you remember from from the first session, we talked about these capabilities, these human development. So if we take that into account, maybe for growth, yeah, maybe with only education, well, maybe you need also health and you need infrastructure anyway. But for this human development, for these possibilities, okay, we need to think, okay, what happens when individuals, maybe they get all the education that they can, maybe even by a miracle, like they really strive to do it, and then at the end they still cannot get a job. This happens, no, a lot, especially in Latin America. A lot of overeducated people as well do not find jobs. And then there's something else that happens there. I know you want to participate, but we don't have time. Let's go then to the second one. In one sentence, what would you say? Is this schooling without learning?
Well, we wrote down arguments for and against, but
yeah.
And I think the main arguments that we had that it wouldn't be a waste of time is that you still get the social aspects of going to school, and the kids aren't, or anybody who's going to school isn't doing anything worse, negative. Also that then the parents can work because it's childcare and it's jobs for teachers or anybody who works at the school. But on the other hand, it's you're not if you're going there, it can be opportunity costs because the skills aren't improving, and then maybe that the kid or that person or anything could be doing something else more productive. And also you're not taking steps forward for growth and development.
Yeah, so maybe it's not a waste of time, maybe it's more, this is what the textbook said, and I was like, it's harsh to say it's a waste of time, it's a waste of opportunity, a missed opportunity. But yeah, this is exactly the arguments I would expect. Sorry, I know there will be a lot of discussion on this, but let's just complete these two because we don't have time, so that the presenters can have more time. So the third group, in one sentence, what was it?
Well, it showed that it was lacking, but like every every other country in the world it got changed by the COVID pandemic.
Especially the infrastructure is a big problem.
Infrastructure,
Yes.
in what sense?
That I think like 40% of the people didn't have access to healthcare services because they lived in rural areas. Of course, I think Latin America is one of the most urbanized countries in the world. That's what you said one time.
Yeah.
But it's still the access isn't important enough, and also the investment. There's not enough investment in the healthcare system.
60% of people in cities didn't have access. I mean, in one of the countries I remember, which I think was Venezuela, but I'm not sure. And the number of nurses and doctors per capita were below the average of the OECD. So I think it was only about 7 nurses per 1,000 people instead of 10.5, and about 3 doctors instead of 4, I think. So it's close, but also still a big difference for.
Yeah.
And also the quality of care.
The quality, exactly.
Yes.
So it's basically the idea is that COVID pandemic just showed we were not ready for such a pandemic, which can happen, no? And that especially the numbers of the investments on health, which are very, very low compared to other more developed countries. This is something that there should be more investment to health and to doctors, to nurses, etc. Okay, then last one.
So we thought more about a circle, a vicious circle.
Leading to a vicious circle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like a negative thing, so if we have no health or poor health, like malnutrition or in younger years, this leads to poor learning in school, and then this poor education means you can't understand health information or have a good job, and this leads to you can't afford healthcare, and this goes on.
Okay, and it
Right.
goes wrong. Yes.
And if you can make it positive.
Yeah.
And it also affects your future diets and how much you have to take from the health care in total. So, yeah. And also,
Okay, you're thinking about the population.
Right.
Yeah, okay, I think you mentioned the strongest point. So they're really complex. If you think about in schools and nutrition of kids, we already know a lot of policies that are like within schools to children. And because it is assumed it's very important for a child to be well fed when they are trying to learn something now. So this nutrition and education complement each other, and also that we said that education has these externalities, that when you're more educated, you have better health, and so this is maybe the more positive circle of the. Okay, and then with that we leave, and we then have the presenters for today, which will focus on education.
yeah, we should have travel.
If one would miss a class, maybe I have to miss the next week's class, would I have to do something? Or
No, if you have like 2 classes in the semester,
And I can just
that
not
is,
come.
yeah, exactly, there's no. If it's more than that, then you have to send an excuse.
More than 2.
Excuse. Yeah, if it's more than 2.
Okay, then that's fine.
Thomas, right? You're presenting today as well?
No,
No,
Thomas.
you're not, right? Remind me your name.
I'm here.
but I will present, I guess, in January.
Okay.
So
Okay.
still some time. Ich mach mal Stand.
You are Gabriel. Sorry, I forgot your name.
Awesome, Gabriel.
What is your name?
My name is Emil.
Emil. Okay.
Just a minute.
We use Gmail to use the website and we're trying to log in, but
Okay. Do you have it in sticks or?
No, it just needs like 10,000 factor authentication.
Then that's not much.
Well, she's like she keeps asking me over and over
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah. But why is it asking for? Because you have it in your cloud.
No, because this is his laptop,
Ah, okay.
so I have to log in. Wait, but now I have to.
No, let's stick USB. Hast du ein HDMI? Nein.
Ein guter alter Videogenerator.
Danke.
Der hat noch jeden Anschluss gehabt.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about education and health. First, we'll have a quick introduction about the authors, then we'll get into the research question, the key concepts, and then we'll present the data and the results. And then we have our critique and some main takeaways. So first we have the authors. We have two authors. We have Eric A. Hauschek, who's a senior economist at Stanford, and he's one of the most cited economists in the economics of education, and is highly credible, has a lot of papers on human capital and growth. Then we have Ludger Bossmann, who's a professor of economics at LMU in Munich, and he's the director of the IFO Institute, which is a leading international research institute on education, productivity, and institutions. And then we have a quick CRAAP to check if the paper is current. And first we have currency. Is the paper recent enough? It's from 2012, and they use data until 2006, so still current enough. Then we have relevance. It directly addresses Latin America's underperformance, gets very to the point, and we'll talk about that. Then authority, as I already just said, it has top researchers, and it was published in the Journal of Development Economics, which is a highly regarded journal. And then for accuracy, it has a lot of heavy empirical analysis and methodological transparency, and a lot of different robustness checks. And its purpose is like academic and explanatory aiming to resolve a long-standing puzzle.
yes. So a little bit of the introduction to this paper. Basically, we are focusing on why did Latin America fall behind? Because back in 1960, Latin America looked like it was on the right track to the economic growth because the region had more employers and higher income levels compared to those places in East Asia, North Africa, and Middle East. But then by 2000, the situation has actually completely changed and flipped, and East Asia, Middle East, and North Africa actually raised far ahead economically, while Latin America is left behind with slower growth and lower income. And that's why it creates our core puzzle. Why did Latin America fall behind despite of a lot of many years of school attendance? And also the paper is trying to answer these puzzles with new data sets using regional tests, LIECE and SERCE, which we will dive further in the next slides. And they also confirm their results also by using more of the instrumental variables and development accounting, which I will show you later. And they also talk about more of the cognitive skills, which can or if it can or cannot causally drive growth. And then the motivation behind this paper, as mentioned earlier, why after over the past 50 years, why Latin Americans still has a low economic growth compared to the rest of the world in countries like East Asia, Middle East, and North Africa once again. And then if the years of schooling alone can be measured and explain this underperformance, that is what interest or like kind of intrigue the authors to argue about. And also that's why it's lead to our research question of this paper. Does low educational achievement in this term is like the actual skills that student can acquire explain Latin American slow growth, and if so, can we improve the learning quality and help the region escape this low growth trap? And that's why we've discussed this in policy implication as well. And the new concepts and theory is that, first of all, the authors definitely redefine human capital. So it's not always about just the years of schooling, but rather the actual skills. This is a big shift, not a shift, sorry. This is a big main point that, okay, qualities do matters more than just quantities of going to school. And then to capture this, they have implemented new adapted test data that measure educational achievement, which will give a better and more reliable picture of the effects of how the students, the effect of the education on the students. And then, yes, so furthermore, they also developed this called Unified Test Score Scale using a splicing technique. This word is new to me as well, so my partner will explain that further. So basically, they're trying to adapt the original test that they have and then align it with the global test, and then they use it as a one consistent measurement system. And also, the paper also trying to address some causality with instrumental variable approaches, and there will a new concept of also if the Latin American effects really exist. And finally, I will mention a little bit more of development accounting as well, that will also show and explain much more of Latin American growth. Okay, and now schooling achievement. Here we are looking at the this formula because the paper is basically not just focusing on the years of schooling, but they are inspired by Hanus Sheikh and Kim Po work to approach another different approach and see and focus more on educational achievement, which measured by test scores, and this will then hopefully lead to see if they drive more productivity and growth later on. So why using cognitive skill or test scores better than just schooling years? In the beginning, you can see that a lot of paper using years of schooling as a substitute for human capital, but then the authors argue that, oh, okay, watch out, we do have two unrealistic assumptions here. I think it's called like prima facie validity. So the first assumption is that is quite unrealistic, is because every year of schooling produce the same amount of knowledge. Like basically, if the quality of study in 1 year in a poor rural school, is it the same as you studying in 1 year in well-funded urban school? And it's not really always the same, because the quality of education varies a lot, depends on many more factors. And also, the second unrealistic assumption is that schooling is the only thing that can determine skills. Is that true? Don't we accounting as our professor mentioned earlier? Don't we account for other family background, health, or even nutrition or surroundings, peer effects, or school quality. And these factors do matter strongly in this case. And that's why the authors focus more on the cognitive skills or the test scores to provide a better and more accurate results. Yes. Okay, here I just want to show this one a little bit because first of all, in the paper they were mentioning that they were using the global test to see and to measure the skills of the students in Latin America countries, and obviously you can see that from the graph figure 2 here, many Latin American countries definitely laid immediately in the lowest rank of the test scores. But does the global test actually appropriate for this, like to measure the ability of the students in Latin America? And the paper has mentioned that they face several problems because the test do not is not appropriate enough to tell apart the students that have the lowest score down on the spectrum, because we cannot tell, we cannot differentiate between them if they are really incompetent, or maybe because the test are way too hard for them, and then the test also usually is only be implemented to use to measure the performance of the countries like in OECD countries, which is richer countries, and that's why the authors shift from using the global test to regional test to find out a better and more reliable test, more reliable results. Okay, a little bit of Latin American growth puzzles. Same as I mentioned earlier, over the past 50 years, why is this still happening? You can see that even though they grew only 1.3 percentage points per year, slower than similar sample countries, which mean the countries in Middle East and Middle East, North Africa, and East Asia, and that is what we will answer in the next slides together.
Yeah, so then we have the empirical side of things. So first, the authors did a regression on the global test, using the global test. Well, first they just did a regression to look at the growth of Latin America on a global scale, and as we already mentioned, Latin America was very far below the rest of the world. Then they started adding different variables to see what would happen. So first they added years of schooling, and Latin America was still really far behind, so this didn't explain the growth. You can also see here all the, like Latin America is the ones with the letters, and it's really low in comparison to the slide. And then they added the test scores, and suddenly the Latin America dummy became 0, so it was insignificant, and the test scores became very significant. So now Latin America wasn't statistically different to the rest of the world. And this showed that the test scores were basically accounting for around 2% annual growth, and this just showed that it was really about the cognitive skills, and that the years of schooling became irrelevant. But as she already mentioned, this was just using the global test, so then, and the global tests aren't a good metric, as we already explained, because the Latin American just came out so low. Also, as there was a social literacy crisis, so like in Brazil and Peru, only about 8 to 12% reach basic literacy by age 15, and this is around 95% in the developed countries and advanced countries. And if you're taking tests that are developed in these countries and then having Latin America perform on it, everything is just really low and the results become really noisy. So then they wanted to introduce a metric that would make it more accurate and maybe measure what's going on in Latin America more, also to see where there is variation. So then they introduced a Latin America specific test, so they have the ECE, which is for 4th graders, and the SERCE, which is for 6th graders, and suddenly what came out was that the variation was huge between Latin American countries. So Uruguay was really high up versus Guatemala or Ecuador, which was a lot lower. And then the authors merged these tests with also the global tests and created an international metric for cross-country measurement to really have a more accurate result.
Usually people call them Jesse and Erse if it's easier.
Okay. Yeah.
As you want.
Okay. Yeah, so then they went back, did the same regression again, but with the new data sets. And first, obviously, before controlling for skills, Latin America still has strong negative growth. But once they added the skills, suddenly, again, the Latin America test dummy became insignificant, and the test scores became significant. And you can also see, if you look at this graph, that there's like an upward trend. I mean, it's a little bit distributed, obviously, but you can see that there's upward trends between growth and the conditional test score. And also here, down here, you can see in comparison to the rest of the world. So again, Latin America is still down there, but it's moving upwards. So it really shows that the main significant difference is that it's not Latin America that's the problem, that's the skills. And they also checked with interaction terms. So they checked if it was, if Latin America was the reason, or it was just the skills, and what came out was that it was not significant. So Latin America was statistically different. So yeah, with better skill data, the conclusion was even stronger that it's the lack of growth is explained by the learning outcome. And then they also introduced an instrumental variable model because, as we already explained a little bit, that these regressions, especially when they're using such a cross-country metric, could have a lot of possible biases, like reverse causality, that it's the other way around actually, or omitted variables, a lot of different things that play into this. And they really wanted to make sure that it was the skills that are affecting the growth. So they introduced 3 different instrumental variables, which would really only impact the skills and then be reflected in the growth, not the other way around. And what they chose here was, one was just the initial schooling in 1960. So this would have been the schooling that then their parents and teachers would have, and then this would affect the results that the kids would have, higher test scores, and then this could be a predictor of really just their skill. Then they also took the share of Catholics in 1900, so this was before they're measuring the growth, and basically there was different distributed amounts of Catholics in Latin America, and they resisted the state schools, and then this caused a lot of private schools to open, and with private schools there was more school competition, and then the quality gets driven up, so this can also reflect skills and then the growth. And then the last one they took was the teacher's relative salary position, so higher pay would attract better teachers, which would then make the skills of the students better, and yeah, so then they ran these results, and what came out was really consistent with what they had in the other regressions, except now they're using these variables, and what came out was that the test scores were still very strong and significant. They also did a bunch of over-identification tests to make sure that these variables aren't influencing growth in another way except for cognitive skills, and they weren't. And then this also just shows that there was really a causal direction going on here, that it was the skills affecting the growth and not the other way around. So in general, just the results and interpretations, what came out of all of this data is that there's just low schooling quality, but also that just there's the global and regional tests both show that the learning outcomes in Latin America is just very, very low in comparison to the rest of the world, so that there should be a focus put on that. And that when skills are included, Latin America isn't a statistical outlier, or and that this relationship is causal.
Okay, and I just put this out there because I want to point out that what is development accounting trying to find out here. So basically they try to quantify how much each factor contribute. Each factor is mean human capital, physical capital, and productivity. And this will also avoid the problem that's been faced with the regular regression model, like it was covered, that my partner has already mentioned, because we want to make sure that is it the education, if better education would lead to better growth in economy, or but if you look in regular regression, this can cause like maybe, oh my god, sorry. Okay,
Don't
wait.
worry.
This one is quite hard for me, but yeah, but my point was that we are trying to avoid that reverse causality that happened in the regular regression models, and also we want to have a better and more reliable and less biased estimates of human capital's impact, because in regular regression you also face with this unobserved variables as well, and yeah. And for the conclusion, so basically we know that the growth puzzle in Latin America can be explained not by just the high school attainment, but definitely by the educational achievement. So in the beginning, even though they have like a really high school years in 1960, but that doesn't ultimately translate into a stronger economic growth later on. Years of schooling alone are not sufficient to determine the growth of the economy, and the quality education do matters much more greatly. And then lastly, if we want to find out, have a better and stronger conclusion, the authors have actually expanded the assessment. That's why my partner was talking about the LESET and SESET test with the global test as well. And then last but not least, we know that instrumental variables model also confirm that the historical and institutional factors affecting school quality, which also strongly linked to economic outcomes and the educational achievement, is definitely a key factor that explains Latin American economic lag. And then lastly, we know some main insights that Latin American effects completely disappear once we also include the skills of the students, which in this case is educational achievement, and this do not apply just within Latin America but also globally. So either you everywhere, if you have a higher skills of students, then that could lead to higher growth in economy. And also in terms of contribution, we have that the paper provides a major data innovation, a new Latin American test score data set that link to the global assessment through a splicing methods. And they also prove the strong causal evidence that using the 3 instrumental variables and skills to definitely explain the growth of economy better, way better than just the schooling alone.
Yeah, so then what does all of this imply for policy and for the future? And the main takeaway is that expanding just on opening schools isn't enough, but actually focusing on the quality, like focusing on the teachers' quality, checking more for disadvantaged students, also making sure that the early foundational skills are developed, and accountability systems to actually track what's going on in the schools would be the policy implication. And yeah, then we have our criticisms and arguments, and the strengths of the paper was that they had really good data innovation using the regional and the global tests, and this also made it have a very strong econometric design and a lot of robustness checks to make sure that what they're saying is really true and backed up and checked a bunch of times. It also has a very high policy relevance and is very current. But weaknesses are that, as we already talked about a little bit, is test scores can't capture all skills and non-cognitive skills. So that's something to keep in mind when looking at the data. And also that the skill measures are from the late 1990s and 2000s, and they're measuring growth from 1960 to 2000. So it can't completely be a reflection of each other if they're only measuring the skills from a little bit later on. Also, the early tests that they're using, all of these were like primary school tests, 4th, 6th grade, can't be a reflection of full human capital because it's just at such an early age. And also that the instrumental variables they use are plausible, but they're still using a bunch of different assumptions, and it can show us a result, but it's still imperfect in the grand scheme of things.
Thank you, guys. I think we have a official comment by Gefei. We can start with you and then.
Yeah. I think it is a good presentation, but the kind of pages is a little bit long, and I think that is the content kind of a little bit overlapped, like conclusion, and the two conclusions could be somehow eliminated, and the yeah, it's in yeah. It is a good presentation, so to say, in general. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I think also it was a very good presentation. I like that you presented the authors and their experience. Also the slides you showed were very nicely made with not so much text, very organized. Sometimes like the way that you organize the bullet points, it's difficult to follow, okay, which one goes after, so maybe you can number them, or like the last presentation was where you show one and then the other, so it helps the viewer to follow you a little bit. Some text was a different color, cannot be seen. Yeah, that was about the style, but then the content. Yeah, so this was, as you saw, a very high-level paper,
Yeah.
but you did a good job at explaining the main point. So I don't expect you to explain the whole methodology of these papers, okay, at this point. I think I mentioned this in the beginning, but maybe I should have mentioned it more. So you did more than what you were expected, you showed more. And I expect if you're not sure about a part, you can always come to my office first before you present and ask me, and we can totally scratch the part because it doesn't change the message of the paper. Or if you really want to explain it and show that you know it, you can too. So you're free to show the methodology. I think I like that, and you try. But of course, if you haven't taken any econometrics classes, you're not expected. This is not a methodology class. I think the paper is like easy in the message, no? The message that it says is just skolkvalitet is better than just school. And it does this by different methodologies, okay? But I think you did more than was expected, which is fine. But just that you know, for the others to know, you don't have to explain the methodology in detail. So you highlighted the puzzle in Latin America in terms of growth. You explained this well, this part of the how is the puzzle, and maybe the model, which was kind of just a simple model, no, to growth. It's good to know, you're in an audience and maybe doesn't know exactly the letters. Usually these models have the letters, and the paper says which letters, and then you go part by part so that everybody understands. Yeah, this is G is for growth, and then H is schooling, and it has this business. And also the graphs, which is showing, I think it's because the paper doesn't include them, which is bad for them. But usually it's good that you say, axis X is showing this, axis Y is showing this. Sometimes it says it, but it's good to like point it out, because sometimes you don't know which variables are exactly there and what is showing. And yeah, you explained the instrumental variables when you say words. And the development accounting is just another way to measure the composition of this. Okay, how much of this growth has been, but you don't need to know this part. It doesn't change the conclusion, so it's fine. Yeah, and you showed at the end some of your own criticism and arguments, which also it's great to discuss the paper and see what can be improved. So yeah, so for you, what was the main message and the main story?
I think that educational quality is very important. We don't look at the quantity of how many students study how many years, but rather look at how much they can acquire their knowledge from the school. Exactly. And I do agree that I put too much information, like almost every point of the paper, which a lot. Yeah. Sorry for that. But
no, it's fine. This is for you to learn this also. You don't learn this with just in one day practice, so it's good that you practice. I think for me the most eye-catching thing in the paper was this fact that, for example, Brazil, it will take like 295 years, something like this, to catch up in terms of learning with OECD countries.
Yeah.
And this tells you like, okay, students in Latin America, they are going to school, all of them. They're probably getting 90 meals they're taken care of, but they're not learning. How? And for me, in my head, it's like, how can a child go every day to school for 8 hours and not even learn, just by osmosis? This is really something that needs to change.
That's why the paper also mentioned, it was just because of the Thai American effects, but
Yeah,
then in
but
reality,
it's just the skills.
It's the skills,
yes.
yeah. So it says at the end, it kind of ends. Oh yeah, there is hope for you. You need to
Yeah.
just increase the education skills, but then this is how do we do that? Is the big question. Now.
Could you maybe go back to this map of the policies? Because I also asked myself if there's like a specific example where those policies have been implemented, where there has been an increase in the learning ability. Is there something mentioned like that in the text?
Can you repeat the question?
If there's like a specific policy that was used already, that was beneficiary to the learning abilities in Latin America.
That has already been implemented.
Yeah, like one example, because for me it seems like it's only theorized.
Yeah.
The theory makes sense, but is there actually like an empirical example for it?
Well,
It's just,
yeah.
there's nothing.
I think the paper wasn't really talking about the project. We also kind of came up with it a little bit ourselves, but the paper didn't go into that more about that.
I mean, I can say there have been, I think, in all of these matters. So prioritize actual learning outcomes and cognitive skills. Yeah, there's a lot of being done in terms of improving the curriculum, for example. What the curriculum should have in a lot of Latin American countries. They have changed from like just knowledge-based curriculum to like skill-based. They have increased also the teaching profession has a lot of the salaries in many countries have been increased in the late years. Evaluation of teachers, there was an obsession with this for the past decades of evaluating, but also there is pushback from the unions because they see it as unfair that this is like a basic service and then you're making it performance based, blah blah. And how can you really tell is the performance of teachers by the TESOL score of the children when this also is influenced by other things? That's a whole other debate. Support for disadvantaged students, we talked about this already. Who remembers? Which policy?
Sorry?
Which policy is doing this? Providing support for disadvantaged students.
I think it was the cash transfer.
Yeah, cash transfer is the main one. So it's for the access. But we learned that for did we learn this in schools? No, there is a paper that shows that cash conditional transfers does not necessarily increase the quality of schooling, just the schooling.
So the inputs.
I think they all have been implemented, but maybe it's just a matter of time when it's going to.
Well, these policies I can tell you have been implemented since like
Forever?
late 90s.
Oh.
So this is maybe another fossil.
Maybe the quality,
Yeah.
it's not being
Well,
implemented effectively enough.
yeah, maybe we can talk about this effectiveness. One problem is the lack of evaluation, what we talked about at the beginning. Lack of evaluation. What other problems do you can come up with why these policies are worked? In Latin America, if anyone has been there knows.
I think there are.
Corruption.
I think there is also other problems that cannot just be solved by funding or improving the education infrastructure, such as maybe struggles that a family has and they have to maybe get out of school earlier or cannot focus or they don't have the support. So I think yes.
Yeah, this inequality that we talked about already permeates into school. So you have a lot of segregation, you have a lot of people that cannot even eat. Why would they go to school without even eating? And may better go and get some food, and it's just like.
I mean, good education costs a lot of money in Latin American countries. And I remember when I went to school in Mexico that they always showed like documentaries on the TV and never teach anything, which is like kind of funny but also a sad example. But it's like, I think inequality is maybe the bigger problem. The more I look at education, I think it's so complicated. You know, I think you also need people who like Pädagogen or like different people who actually like beschäftigen sich nur mit education. That you need them to work on it. But if you look at it from an economical standpoint, it's so difficult, like to look at policies and to implement them. But also you kind of have to. And education seems to me as if it is one of the most difficult aspects to manage and to look at in terms of like a development perspective.
Yeah, I think
and
so.
it's kind of frustrating.
I think maybe it's also a ripple effect, you know, maybe it begins from the education, and because people who, you know, the education was never good enough, and then they produced people who are also not, you know, were productive enough, and they are not, you know, they are used to the environment where everything's got by easy, just do anything easy and get away with it, and then that's why it's like, it affects from first from the younger generation to grown up and to future career.
Who come
They also experience the same education experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge system that needs a lot of different aspects, political aspects, systemic, from the school side, from the family side, from the student side. And yes, I focus on the education economics. I can tell you it's very frustrating not to see a clear path where it's. So it's still the test scores of these PISA outcomes. We still don't see the improvement. Also, COVID decreased, pushed us back. Hopefully in the next few years we can see. But I think you mentioned something very important, is that these tests only measure the cognitive ability. And for example, miss a lot of other things that also can make a person productive in different fields, no? Like arts, creativity, or. And actually, just the last work in PISA last year, they measured creativity as a new measure in the test. And actually, the Latin American countries, they came up as some of like with the highest creativity, and that this impacts also their results. So this is something that now is being considered, and maybe the paradigm changes that they are just having low scores, but maybe in other aspects they are better. So
we're definitely looking at like a brighter future, I think.
Yeah, at least to give us some hope. You know, it's not just. But okay, thank you guys.
So, ich merke jetzt die Zeit. Das ist kein Unterschied. No worries.
Did you watch the material list, right?
Yes.
Nobody wants to watch that.
But I feel like
I do kind of sad.
but really like let's say if I choose what is it, Harry and the other guy was his name? Because like she's rich. She's gonna get promoted. But that's fucked up.
The scene was like very bad. And she put up the thing.
So what?
The wounds on the knee.
Oh yeah.